Thousands of people are cheering at the news of 1,000 ATF agents being cut, but there's something about it that makes it seem too flashy, like it's a little too good to be true. There's a feeling in the air that this might be another bureaucratic trick rather than a victory for our Second Amendment rights. But is it just a feeling? In this video, we'll talk about the real story behind the headlines claiming that Director Kash Patel just gutted the ATF, and we'll see why it might not be what it sounds like at first glance. Everyone wants to believe that any move against the ATF is an automatic win for gun owners. After all, this agency has a long record of hassling firearms dealers, harassing law-abiding citizens, and even being tied to events that led to tragic outcomes for American families. The thought of 1,000 agents suddenly vanishing from that roster might appear to be a dream scenario for folks like us who support the Second Amendment. However, before we start raising toasts or patting ourselves on the back, we need to step back and ask if these news reports actually hold water. A story can spread like wildfire, especially when it involves something as significant as slashing an organization that's often perceived as an enemy to our constitutional freedoms. Kash Patel's role is a big part of why some individuals assumed this story was true. He's been widely seen by many in our community as an ally to conservative causes, and a portion of the media has painted him as a powerful figure on the side of shrinking federal overreach. Despite this impression, not every bureaucratic maneuver equals a decisive blow to the forces that clamp down on our rights. If the details show that no one got fired and that the same people are still cashing government paychecks, we can't, in all honesty, call it a genuine cut. Perhaps it's just a reshuffle, people slipping off one windbreaker labeled ATF and slipping on another labeled FBI, or maybe the number being tossed around isn't accurate at all. Some of you might already have strong feelings about this because the initial story claimed a nearly 40% reduction in the ATF's workforce. That's a massive number, and I'll admit that when I first saw that figure, I felt a surge of optimism. But here's the real question. Are we seeing an actual budget slash and staff downsizing, or is it simply bureaucrats shifting from one desk to another? Gun owners of America originally reacted as though this was a giant leap forward. I applaud GOA for their passion and all they do to fight for our freedoms, but in this instance, it might have been a case of celebrating a major victory too soon. Most of us have made that mistake at one time or another. It's easy to get excited when you think your side scored a goal. Let me know your thoughts so far. Drop a comment below if you think this was an honest attempt to rein in the ATF or just another Washington stunt. I'd love to hear your perspective on what this means for our Second Amendment rights. When we look closer at what's actually happening, the ATF's own statement should raise eyebrows. Officials there say the real number of agents being reassigned is just 150, and these people are going to be working on what they call border-related enforcement. Even more telling is that they stress it's a temporary reassignment. In other words, these folks aren't losing their jobs, they aren't losing pay, and they aren't being placed under the FBI's official purview in the way the headlines implied. Meanwhile, Kash Patel's team supposedly spoke of cost savings, but that doesn't add up when every single individual still keeps their federal salary, their benefits, and their retirement. It's like taking the same deck of cards and shuffling them. They're still in the deck, but the order is slightly different. What troubles me is the possibility that this movement just allows the same characters to operate in a bigger, more influential bureau. The FBI has a larger budget, a more recognized name among the general public, and its own set of controversies. If anything, I'd be worried that we're just giving more resources and cover to people who have a mindset that rubs against the freedoms we cherish. Not only that, we've been told for years about deeply embedded elements in the ATF who were involved in or enabled questionable operations like Ruby Ridge, Waco, and Fast and Furious. Why should anyone think these same personalities will magically become more restrained or more honorable just because they're wearing a different jacket? True reform would mean getting rid of the bad seeds outright. If somebody is an abuser of power, overstepping their bounds, bending or breaking the Constitution, then I want them gone, not just sitting in a different office. Hearing that 1,000 agents might be cut sounded amazing until we realized it's not a cut at all. It's more like a maneuver that's potentially purely cosmetic, unless the final plan involves genuine terminations, which, so far, we have zero evidence of. It feels a lot like those instances in big corporations where a scandal breaks, and to calm the public, they say they're transferring the folks involved to another department. That doesn't address the root problem. If an institution has people who gleefully trample on rights or who condone unethical approaches to policing, then leaving them in the system is the same as leaving a ticking time bomb behind. I'd prefer removing that potential hazard altogether, not awarding it a change of scenery. There's an example that truly highlights why simply shifting personnel doesn't make me breathe easier. In Milwaukee, about a decade ago, ATF agents conducted a botched undercover sting. They rented a storefront under false pretenses, used a mentally disabled man to lure in targets, and allegedly compensated him in small amounts of cash and cigarettes, all while encouraging him to procure illegal firearms and drugs for them. Afterwards, they turned around and slapped him with serious federal charges that threatened to lock him away for a huge chunk of his life. The details are downright sickening. The man's grandmother testified that he had no real grasp of what he was doing, yet he viewed the undercover agents as his friends. Meanwhile, agents neglected to pay rent, damaged the property, and even lost a government-issued machine gun that remains unaccounted for. They left sensitive documents behind when they finally abandoned the storefront. If you or I had that sort of debacle, I suspect we'd be under the jail by now. But as far as most of us know, nobody was meaningfully punished. The same individuals, or at least people with a similar mindset, could now be wearing FBI gear or bouncing back to the ATF. That's not a comforting thought. That Milwaukee operation is a prime example of the sort of moral compromise that has no place in law enforcement. The notion that these agents can say, "I was only doing my job," doesn't pass the smell test. If you're told to do something that is unethical, you step away or refuse. Even if we put aside how rotten it was to exploit someone who has a low IQ, the fact they charged him with federal crimes after using him reveals a level of callousness that defies explanation. If you ask me, it signals a deeper cultural problem. It's not just one or two individuals going rogue, it's an agency environment that allows and even rewards such tactics. I have my own personal anecdote, although on a much smaller scale, about walking away from a lucrative position because I wasn't comfortable with how they wanted me to treat certain employees. When your inner voice tells you this is wrong and you keep pushing forward because the company or agency says so, you're complicit. You're not a hero, you're just another cog in a machine that's grinding away at somebody's dignity or rights. This is where "I was only following orders" leads, and it never leads to a good outcome. So, if any of these agents who took part in Waco, Ruby Ridge, Fast and Furious, or even the Milwaukee fiasco are still pulling paychecks, there should be serious questions about whether they should remain in federal law enforcement at all. Now we're told that a chunk of ATF staffers might be absorbed by the FBI for border enforcement. Could there be a silver lining, like fewer personnel focusing on firearms issues at the ATF? Possibly. Some argue this could at least reduce the number of agents specifically poking around in gun shops or hassling law-abiding gun owners. But if it's only a temporary pivot, that might not bring lasting relief. Once the fuss dies down, they could be reassigned right back to the same tasks they always did. Meanwhile, the culture remains unchanged. The good old boys are still patting each other on the back, and the script never really moves forward. If the government wanted to demonstrate a sincere effort to curb the unconstitutional overreach we've seen from the ATF, they'd introduce actual terminations for repeated abuses of authority. They'd announce transparent investigations into misconduct rather than offering lip service and shifting people around under the radar. We haven't heard anything along those lines. All we hear is talk of cost savings without tangible details. The moment we see the fine print, it appears these folks are simply sidestepping from one role to another while the payroll remains intact. Nobody is celebrating the notion of innocent employees losing their jobs. But the ATF is not an office where everyone is guiltless. We have witnessed multiple fiascos that did actual harm to innocent American citizens. When an agency stumbles that severely, the only honest approach is to clean house. Failing to do that almost guarantees there will be another Ruby Ridge or another fiasco like Fast and Furious, and I truly don't want to see that. This country has had enough heartbreak from agencies that should be protecting our freedoms, not undermining them. I don't know about you, but I don't want to pop open a case of celebratory drinks unless we see real structural change. Cutting 1,000 staff members might have been that kind of signal, but that's not what's going on. It's a game of hot potato, passing bodies between departments while making it seem like a win. If you listen closely, you can almost hear the federal machine humming along, unaffected. If nobody's losing a job, nobody's losing rank, and nobody's losing a penny, then it's not a reduction. It's basically a story that got inflated to generate buzz, possibly by those who wanted to show some big anti-ATF move when the reality is far less dramatic. Let me pause here and say, I'm pro 2A, and I want any changes at the ATF to be real. If Kash Patel wants to purge the place and show accountability, I'd be the first to applaud. But based on the evidence, this entire wave of headlines might be more hype than substance. Maybe some agents have been rerouted for a short time, but that's a far cry from the soul-cleansing action we truly need in that agency. Nothing about this shuffle signals a large-scale liberation for FFL holders or everyday Americans trying to exercise their constitutional right to keep and bear arms. If anything, what we should be looking for is a statement along the lines of X number of agents have been dismissed for misconduct or for violating constitutional protections. That would be something that indicates an actual shift. We'd want to see documented discipline for those who orchestrated questionable sting operations or participated in the tragedies of the past. We'd expect a thorough review of every single agent's record to ensure that our government is staffed by individuals who genuinely honor their oath to the Constitution. Since we don't see anything of that sort happening, this alleged cut of 1,000 agents feels about as genuine as a cardboard cutout. Sometimes moves like this are made to temporarily relieve a hot spot of negative attention. The ATF has had lawsuits, it has faced public outcry from gun owners, and it has been in the spotlight for overstepping boundaries. Sending a fraction of its workforce somewhere else might calm some of that public ire without actually changing the nature of the beast. I get why many of us latched onto this story with such enthusiasm. I felt a flicker of hope too. But after looking at the fine details, I'm now unimpressed. This is just a publicity stunt to me, not a genuine victory. But what do you think? Comment below, and please like, share, subscribe, and click on the bell icon for more of these videos. Thanks for watching.